Well, and I welcome the opportunity to take part in this debate. And I want to thank my colleague, Deputy Pringle, for outlining the situation and the report from the committee, which I won't repeat. But I just want to put it in perspective because less than, I think, 2 months ago, on the 17th of December, this Dáil passed a motion which I had the privilege of putting in relation to developing a policy for the islands. And you mentioned that tonight, but what you failed to mention, Minister, was the effort that had to go in to get that motion passed, and it was passed. Actually, I can't remember whether you voted with it. It was certainly passed by an overwhelming majority. But it highlighted the absolute lack of policy for islands. That's why we were forced to bring that motion on the 17th December. And in speaking on that night, I pointed out that going back to 1996, a report was published of the Interdepartmental Coordinating Committee on Island Development, a strategic framework for developing the offshore islands of Ireland, and so on. Lots of very good ideas, none of them enacted. Fast forward to 2019, and we have another interdepartmental committee. I mean, I welcome it, but it's certainly not what we wanted, I or my colleagues. And it certainly doesn't have proper representation. In fact, the Minister had an unfortunate use of language when he said, well, actually, we can't have islanders on that interdepartmental committee because maybe people, officials mightn't feel free to talk, which really captures and encapsulates yes, I'm actually quoting Connolly in relation to that. That was the statement on the night, that you couldn't have islanders on the committee. And it seems to me that that's a huge problem in officialdom, that we think actually listening to people with ears and then taking on board what they're saying is problematic. And so then tonight you come in and you give us the background, and I've read the reasoned opinion, and I actually see some of the difficulties in the the bill as it's before me, but they are problems that can be overcome and can be rectified. And the bill is based on a background. I mentioned the original report back in 1996. Then in 2014, we had a detailed report, again setting out recommendations. And Deputy Pringle has referred to recommendation 10 in relation to that we should explore the feasibility of heritage licence to be issued by the Department for rural, coastal and island fishing communities. And Deputy Pringle has pointed out that we're not just focusing on island communities, it's also open, and we would hope to be developed for coastal communities. So that's the background, 2014. Fast forward then, we have another committee looking at this, which Deputy Pringle opened tonight, and the date of that is November 18. So nothing has been done here in a hurry. Everything has been very slow and tortuous, and meantime, the population of the islands is declining, and it's very difficult for people to have hope. And I notice in relation to the committee and the submissions, we had Cógáil Éireann Éireann, which is from my side. I come, as you know, from Galway West. I represent Galway West, which is a huge constituency, a huge variation. It includes the 3 Aran Islands and Inishbofin. And so we had somebody from Inishbofin making a presentation, and then we had the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation. Again, I recognise both of the names, and one of them is from my constituency on Inisheer. In addition, I see a contribution from Dr. Ruth Brennan, who pointed out the difference between equality and equity and forced me to think about that. So I'm actually hoping that you'll be forced to think about that. What is equality and what is equity? And she gave a very good anecdote in there that explains it. And equity means a lot more than equality. So when we look at the islands, we want to deal with them in an equitable manner. And all that this motion is asking for is that we let the bill go to third stage, to look at the difficulties in the bill, work them out, and in recognition of what the islanders have asked for an extraordinary length of time. Why? Because it is very good for the economy that we have islands that are functioning, that people are living there, and they're on every level that I went into on the last occasion when I was talking about them. For tonight, Minister, it strikes me as a little arrogant that you might talk about the bill being well-intentioned but ill-informed when you tell us it's against. I think perhaps there might be ill information on the government side as well, because EU legislation, and again, I'm only quoting from the committee, and they had the experts in, and so they tell us that recitals 19 and 20 of the Common Fisheries Policy, Regulation 13802/2013, 20 in particular, small offshore islands which are dependent on fishing should, where appropriate, be especially recognised and supported in order to enable them to survive and prosper. And in relation to 19, it's there for you to read, but the last line of it, member states should endeavour to give preferential access for small artisanal or coastal fishermen. So that's that. In addition then, the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation very helpfully point out that the Common Fisheries Policy in the preamble, paragraph 20, small offshore islands which are dependent on fishing should, where appropriate, be especially recognised and supported in order to enable them to survive and prosper. And then, equally as helpful, on page 4 of the report, the committee tells us that there are precedents for doing this. And so they point out a number of international case studies for us, where local communities have found ways to sustain their traditional fishing methods. And they mention in particular the Shetland Islands, they mention in particular the Costa region in Sweden, and Lyra, and forgive my pronunciation, in Galicia in Spain. So it would appear that the absence of information is on the government side in relation to policy, and a very, very limited interpretation of regulations to suit the fact that we don't want this bill to go through. So I would think something has happened in the sense that we have, you mentioned policy changes. And I welcome those policy changes that has happened in relation to the exclusion of certain boats within the 6 miles. Of course, it begs the question why it took up to now to do that when it could have been done before, in recognition of what fishermen have been saying for a long time. And the second item that you itemised was in relation to communication, and that has improved, which again begs the question as to why communication couldn't have improved many, many years ago. We don't need to go back too far, but certainly back to the 2014 report, where they recommended certain recommendations. So I have no hesitation in supporting the motion here tonight, although I do see problems in the legislation. I did look at the reasoned opinion and read it. However, I think there's a much bigger picture and a challenge to the government to actually make a reality their words. And if we want a sustainable island community, then we want a policy, and we need it urgently. And in the formation of that policy, we need to hear the voices of the islanders. And if they can't sit on an interdepartmental committee, then that committee is not right, and we must change it so that we have the people that matter. Every report that I've read in preparation for tonight and for the debate last September said the voices of those who are going to live on the islands are the most important voices. And that's who we should be listening to. And finally, in relation to the producers' organisation, or the group that attempted to comply with the rules, play by the regulations, and they didn't succeed. And they were refused on the 20th of September 2019 because of a criterion. Now, I certainly understand if there are mandatory criteria that would have excluded them if they didn't reach that level. But at the very basic, that should be all very apparent to any group that's coming forward to be an organisation, an islands fisheries producer organisation. At the end of the day, we want small groups, we want small businesses, and we want cooperatives on the ground. They are the backbone of any country. So, Minister, I hope that you're listening tonight, and I hope at the very least out of this that this will go to third stage and that you will meet the groups on the ground. Now, you mentioned forums. Quite clearly, they're not adequately reflecting the opinions on the ground, because if they were, Minister, you're shaking your head, we certainly wouldn't be here at 7:15 on a Thursday night unless we're reflecting what people are telling us on the ground and asking us to say in the Dáil. Gur míle mágad a ceann.